Hello.
That was so wild and crazy when everybody came in.
Hi,
We still have like
everyone.
5 minutes left of Purim, so we're
Yes,
still in the Purim spirit until
yes.
the sun goes down all the way.
So Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach.
Yeah.
So welcome. I know we have like maybe in Chicagoland a few more minutes of Purim, but if you also happen to be living in a walled city of sorts, we're going to wish you a happy Shushan Purim, which begins tonight and goes all the way through tomorrow. I love Shushan Purim also because it happens to be my Jewish birthday.
Yom
So
Haledet Sameach.
so now it's like truly official. I'm actually 50 both in, regular, I don't know, regular years and Jewish years. It's happened. So it's good to come together tonight to continue our journey through this year's Jewish Music Heritage Learning Series, taking a look and listen back at the history of Chicagoland Jewish music. As many of you are aware, last fall we were joined by Dr. Judah Cohen from Indiana University, who led us through a wonderful jam-packed two-session overview of Jewish music in the Chicagoland area. In the last 2 months, we began a bit of a deeper dive into a few of the prominent figures who have made their mark in our area and beyond, hearing about Max Janowski from Cantor David Berger and the generations of the Lind family cantors from Cantor Joanna Lind. Tonight, we welcome back to Am Shalom our dear friend and colleague, Cantor Richard Cohn. Director of the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion since 2015, Cantor Cohn has served the Jewish people and the greater community as a congregational cantor since the early 1980s, believe, in the Chicago area at Oak Park Temple and with our neighbors at North Shore Congregation Israel and with Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, Texas. Some highlights, there are so many, just picked out a few. Some highlights of Cantor Cohn's illustrious career include performances as a soloist with the Jerusalem Symphony, Chicago's Grant Park concerts, the Berkshire Choral Festival, and the Chicago Symphony Orchestra under the batons of Daniel Barenboim and Sir Solti. He is the founding conductor of Kol Zimra, the Jewish Community Singers of Greater Chicago, and a frequent principal conductor at the North American Jewish Choral Festival and for Hazamir, the International Jewish High School Choir. He previously served for 6 years as president of the American Conference of Cantors and was an active board member of the Union for Reform Judaism's Board and Commission on Music, Worship, and Religious Living. In addition to directing the cantorial school, as if he had any more time past that, he is also a faculty member with the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, and he is a highly sought after guest scholar and lecturer. We are so glad that we could coax Cantor Cohn into joining us for this special session tonight on HANS WURMAN. Cantor Cohn, welcome once again, and thank you for making the time to be with us. We turn the Zoom over to you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Cantor Markowitz and Cantor Staple. Some of my favorite cantors, and of course, Am Shalom, a wonderful community with a great tradition of music. And now I'm totally self-conscious because I'm spotlighted. So I'm going back to gallery so I can see everybody there. Now I'm happy. And I'm really privileged to offer some reminiscences tonight of my friend and colleague, Hans WURMAN. And I know that some of you have early memories of Hans as well. And it's a privilege to be here with you. Considering that our Chicago musical family is such a special one in the Jewish world. So I thought that I would begin with a piece of music, so I'm going to just shift myself to the piano, and maybe some of you will recognize this piece. from an earlier point in your life. I'll explain what it is after I sing it. Adonai tzuri v'go'ali yiyu l'ratzon imrefi. So that beautiful Yehu Ratzon is from this book. Let's see if I can get it to focus, since it's focusing on me. How about if that's so funny. Can't get it to focus. So this music book is called Avodah La'ami, a service for my people, a service for Friday Eve and Sabbath morning. And it was published by Transcontinental Music, I think, in 1963. And has the following preface written by Rabbi Eric Friedland of Beth Am, the People's Synagogue, on the south side. It was located at 7133 South Coles, which is just below 71st on the South Shore, and HANS was the music director and the organist there. And I am privileged to read Rabbi Friedland's words. The music of the synagogue reflects the history of the Jewish people. In it are recorded the religious and aesthetic attitudes conditioned by experience in Oriental and Western lands. Sometimes the melodies are gay and happy, sometimes they are somber and introspective. Each tune reveals a facet of the Jewish character as it was modified by the realities of life. And then he says in 1963, "We have come a long way. The liturgy of our prayer books contains old devotions and new ones. Associated with them are cantillations, chants, and modes of ancient and fairly recent vintage. They are a mirror of the indomitable spirit and creative impulse of our people." And he continues, "In our time, there has been a new thrust to Jewish musicology. While appreciating the traditions of the past, which followed specific modal patterns, contemporary artists have charted new tonalities and memorable melodies. We are happy to present the compositions of Hans WURMAN, choir director and organist at Beth Am, the People's Synagogue in Chicago. The present volume contains a fraction of his fruitful efforts during the past 10 years, so he must have begun at Beth Am around 1953, which I am happy to say was before I was born, but not by much." And Rabbi Friedland concludes, "We hope that other synagogues will derive as much joy and inspiration from these selections as we have." So there are many movements in this volume, of which Yehu Ratzon has been one of the most enduring. And since part of our focus tonight and in this series is on music for choir, I'll just explain that in this setting, what I was playing on the piano is the choral part. So if you're listening very carefully, you may have heard a reference to the Adon Olam that goes back very, very much farther than this piece. But such beautiful harmonic writing, and I think that this is a real characteristic of Hans WURMAN's creativity, is his ability to use harmony and unexpected changes in the voicing of the chords to bring out the feeling in the music and to illuminate it with a special tone. So as we begin, I want to also suggest that the very last recording I'll play for you tonight is one that reminisces a little bit about this style of music from the 50s and early 60s, but it was composed, that is, the piece that with which we'll conclude was not composed until 1994. So over this 50-year period, or 40-year period, this harmonic language was very much a part of Hans's approach to Jewish music, and I'll have a little bit more to say about that. Of course, just to kind of finish the historical review, after Beth Am, Hans was music director and organist at Sinai Congregation on 54th and South Shore, where I had the privilege of singing with him. He was there for a long time and only came to Oak Park Temple because he was not busy at Sinai on Friday nights. Sinai was holding worship on Sunday mornings still when I was in Oak Park in the 1980s, and I realized that Hans was free on Friday nights, and so so he was moonlighting with us, so to speak, in Oak Park River Forest. And after I came to North Shore Congregation Israel, he and I worked on 2 special projects together that I'll share a little bit with you tonight. So I wanted to play one other piece from this same volume that was published by Transcontinental Music in 1963, and I had no idea until I met with the Cantors a little bit earlier that you're going to be singing it at Am Shalom before long. So you may think that this melody was written at Sinai, but it was actually written at Beth Am. So, but it's such a familiar sounding melody for Ein Keloheinu. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu, Micheloheinu, Michadonenu, Michemalkeinu, Michemoshienu, Non Eloheinu, Non Eladonenu, Non Elemalkeinu, Non Elemoshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. A really great congregational melody. And since we'll be talking about unison choir in a little bit, I thought that I would sing that. And if you thought you've heard it, if you thought you were born knowing it, that's Hans's Ein Keloheinu. And Cantor Markowitz, what was the context you told me that we'd be hearing it at Am Shalom?
It is going to be our first Jewish Music Heritage Series Shabbat, back with the adult choir in August.
Yay. So with the return of the choir shall come Ein Keloheinu.
Yes. Well, the choir will return hopefully earlier than that. But the first Jewish Music Heritage Series, yes. Shabbat.
That's great. So I want to share with you a recording of another vintage work of Hans WURMAN that is illustrative of his choral style. It's an a cappella setting of Avinu Malkeinu, and it used to be quite well known among the many settings of Avinu Malkeinu for High Holy Days. I'm indebted to Scott Coomer, who's the music director at Sinai, which is now downtown, of course, and not in Hyde Park, who had this recording of the Sinai choir singing at High Holy Days this Avinu Malkeinu. And I want to invite us to listen to it, see if you recognize any of the melodic material, see if you can imagine singing along to part of it. Think about the texture of how the choral and the solo portions of the music are displayed in this work. And it'll be interesting for me to hear a little bit from you about it after we listen. So here is Avinu Malkeinu. We always used to have a amen at the end of every piece. So how about that Chadesh Aleinu Shana Tova, the absolutely creative harmony that bursts out at Renew Us for a good year. It's just amazing. What did you notice, anybody, about, you can unmute if you haven't answered this question, there's a very familiar melodic motif on which this piece is based. Did anybody happen to pick it up? So do you know how often in High Holy Days we go, Amen? So literally that's where he starts. Avinu Malkeinu, and the da 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 is Chadesh Yameinu from Eitz Chaim Hashivenu. So he took the motif from the Amen that we all think of as the motto. Lots of chanting on High Holy Days ends with that, and then the congregation responds, Amen. And then he took the Chadesh Yameinu that everybody knows from Hashivenu, from return us and we will return, and molded those into his Avinu Malkeinu with this texture of the choral part running along and the soloist coming out of the texture and then returning to it. And then every once in a while in the harmony, just like the piece that I played for you at the beginning, a shift from minor to major, from major to minor, things that you aren't expecting, in which the music really comes to life. It's quite a striking piece and a nice recording, and I want to thank Scott Coomer again for sending that over. So
Cantor Cohn. I'm going to confess I'm delinquent But actually, both Cantor David Berger and I were delinquent last year then in not including this piece in the High Holy Day repertoire piece. So we're going to have to rectify that
Okay.
at the DFSSM.
Oh, it wasn't in the course that you taught.
No. Amongst the 15 or 20 High Holy Days Avinu Malkenu's, neither of
That you
us
taught.
had that one. So we're going to have to rectify that mistake and add that back.
That's
add that
very
in.
funny. Very, very funny. So anyway, that's as I say, illustrative of the kind of choral and solo writing that was typical of the pieces that Hans was composing in the tradition of synagogue composers who were not specifically writing for congregational participation most of the time, although the Ein Kelohenu is an obvious example of something that was clearly meant to be sung by everybody. And even the Avinu Malkeinu, I could imagine people joining in and being part of that. But where we're headed here tonight is efforts that Hans and I made to develop a language for congregational singing during our work together in the late 80s and early 90s. So we'll get there in just a few minutes. But to share a little bit more about Hans, he was a musical prodigy. And to understand kind of how he was in the synagogue, it was important to know just how great a facility he had. He could play anything in any key. He'd just say, I'm going to sing this in B flat instead of E, and he would just play it without a second thought. And, you know, he had a tremendous ear. And when he was the organist at Oak Park Temple, we used to do kind of a double improvisation where I would just start out in something and he would immediately kind of grasp onto where I was, and then I would go on an improvisation and he would improvise on my improvisation. And I don't know that we always ended in the same key where we began, but we used to enjoy doing that. And the background on Hans in terms of his role in the wider world of music includes a lot of work that he did for Moog synthesizers. So that's M-O-O-G. So if you are familiar at all with the Moog synthesizer, it was an early musical synthesizer, started around 1964. By the late 60s, Hans was doing work with this big workstation that you could program music into, and he actually published commercial albums on the Moog synthesizer. One was called The Moog Strikes Bach, B-A-C-H. To say nothing of Chopin, Mozart, Rachmaninoff, Paganini, and Prokofiev. So he had rendered into electronic music a lot of the works of these composers. He had an album called Chopin à la Moog, with lots of strings attached. He was a punster, that's the name of the album, with lots of strings attached. Another album he published was called Electric Nutcracker, and finally Comic Carmen. So you're thinking, okay, what was all this electronic music about in which he was a pioneer? So I will play you an excerpt from the Bach Organ Sonata No. 5, third movement, the Allegro, as rendered by Hans WURMAN on Moog synthesizer. That's just a section of the track. The point being that here was somebody who was fully immersed in the classical idiom and presented in this creative way. I thought it would be fun. Oh, I'm just reading what you're saying. Cool.
I could just say it, but
yeah.
Yes. Fun fact.
So here's another Moog track from HANS, and I am playing this one because I want you to have a sense of his sense of humor, which was incredible. He was a total prankster in music, and without further comment, here's a section of his rendition of melodies in part from the opera Carmen. So I think that we heard a mashup of the Marseillaise, Daisy, Daisy, Give Me Your Answer True, and the Toreador song at one point, and something from horse racing mixed in. So the point is, this was somebody with incredible imagination who was deeply rooted in tradition, but was also incredibly progressive. And so when I was working with HANS, I was thinking, how can we think about a progressive approach to what we're doing in Jewish music in Oak Park, in Glencoe, with a particular emphasis on thinking about the use of our volunteer choir. And can you still hear me clearly, by the way? Yeah, okay. One of those messages that makes you a little nervous. So after I had migrated from Oak Park to Glencoe, I was in touch with HANS, and we talked about a few projects, and on which we settled was what he called a drama with music on the story of Moses. And in this piece that I'm going to share a little bit of with you, HANS to explore the use of unison chorus as a character in dialogue. This was not obviously original to him, but in the context of Jewish music in the early 90s, it was relevant. because we were thinking a lot about what we now call at HUC empowering the congregational voice. We even teach a course. It's called The Prayer Leader and the Congregational Voice, that's taught by Cantor Benjiel and Schiller and Professor Mary Arian. And the whole thesis of it is, how do we really bring our congregants in their full vocal and spiritual presence into everything we do? And the first piece is at the Jordan, a little bit theater piece, might call it a Devar Torah. In it, HANS began to think about congregational voice as part of a dialogue, as part of Torah study, as part of living Torah, long before others were doing things like that. So he called this work Moses at the Jordan, and it's the story of Moses not being able to enter the Promised Land. The libretto was by Jonathan Abarbanel, who as a playwright eventually became a very prominent theater critic. And we offered this this drama with music at North Shore Congregation Israel with me and soprano Patrice Michaels and a professional choir, string quartet, harp, and a narrator. And in the score, HANS specifically says that this can be sung by not only professional singers, but volunteer singers as well. He says that in place of strings, this can be performed on organ or piano. He says Moses must act his emotional states, especially the despair, disbelief, and acceptance that come about in the story of Moses not entering the promise. He says the chorus can but need not be trained singers. Their music is in unison and sometimes antiphonal. And so he uses the chorus as kind of a Greek chorus, or I guess we'll call them a Hebrew chorus, a Hebraic chorus. He uses them to become the actual voice of the divine presence. He uses them as characters in the action. And we'll hear various examples of this as I play selections from the score. So Cantor Markowitz is going to be nice enough to put in the chat the words. They're already in English, but a little hard maybe to hear completely in these recordings. So we're going to first hear the opening of this piece, which is called Who is Moses? And it begins, Moses, who is Moses? From the Hebrew Moshe, 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 taken from the river. And so you'll experience a little bit of this Torah interpretation through music, and you'll hear mostly choral voices in this section. In fact, I think this is entirely a choral texture. And you'll see that the people are trying to understand this historical figure and what he represents. Beginning of Moses at the Jordan. Who is Moses? So the chorus is actually the promulgator of the beginning of this drama in the way that you've just heard. As the story unfolds, there's a dialogue between Moses and the chorus in which Moses says that he, as a servant of God, strikes in the context of what he is commanded by the Holy One. And he gives various examples. When he struck the Egyptian beating a Hebrew, when he had Aaron with his staff the waters of the Nile, when he struck the rock in the first instance at Horeb and the water came forth. So let's hear a little bit of this dialogue, Cantor Markowitz, I strike for the Lord, beginning with Moses and listening to the interchange between Moses and the chorus in this context. Here we go.
I strike for the Lord at the Lord's command. Who strikes the ground, sinner or saint? I struck for the Lord. Who strikes the ground, sinner or saint? I struck for the Lord, when I struck an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, sorcerer, worker of wonders. I struck for the Lord, when I ordered my brother to strike with my staff the waters of the Nile, the dust of the earth, the river turned to blood, the dust clouds turn to gnats. I struck for the Lord yet again at Horeb. Israel thirsted there at Horeb. I struck for the Lord as the Lord commanded. And you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it. And gushed forth at the well of Meribah. Is the
So the question that the chorus asks is saint or sinner? And in this particular section of the work, it acts in accordance, in alignment with the commandments of God, and is therefore perceived by the people as the arm of God. Of course, we know where this drama eventually leads, to the second occurrence where Moses is commanded to speak to the rock, to tell the rock, and instead he strikes. So let's listen to that episode in which the chorus takes both sides. Don't strike and strike. And Moses strikes the rock, and the remainder of the drama plays forward from there. So Cantor Markowitz, let's post rock, and we'll listen.
Moses, do not time Moses cannot see.
Have a rock, Moses, do not strike.
He raises high the Lord's great staff, the staff that turned the Nile to blood, the rod the Red Sea parted for. He brings it down with all his force. I strike the Lord.
Strike the rock.
Strike the rock.
And the rock weeps, washing forth saltless tears to break the fast of Israel. And the rock weeps for the broken faith of old.
So Moses' faith fails him in this moment, and that's the reason, of course, for not crossing into the promised land. And the music goes on in the dialogue between Moses and God around that decision and Moses' insistence that he should be forgiven and allowed to proceed. And the gevura, the strength of the divine decision not for Moses not to enter the land. In the end, however, it's clear that Moses is beloved of God, and that although there are consequences for his action, he is, how shall we put it, commended to rest his soul in God's presence in the trust that he will be received with that love. So let's listen to a little bit of the conclusion of this work, and you'll have had a taste of how it unfolds. This is a lullaby for Moses. It begins this section with Moses acknowledging that he has reached his final day, and then the soprano Patrice Michaels, whom you just heard singing so beautifully, and the chorus sing Moses to sleep in God's presence. So Cantor Markowitz, if you could post I Have Always Known, and we'll play this section.
And the Lord sang a sweet song in Moses' ear.
and the final scene continues briefly after that. I really wanted you to have an experience of the mature work. I mean, not that the early works of WURMAN were not already mature, but in the later part of his life, how he turned to this creative texture and was working with cantorial voice and choral voice and congregational voice all together. And where we then went next was to liturgy. So the Moses at the Jordan was presented in 1993. In 1994, we worked together on a project which we ended up calling Avodah B'Shirah, worship in or through song. And it was somewhat tongue-in-cheek, named specifically because HANS's earlier work that I played from at the beginning in the Blue Book was called Avodah La'ami, which also was a pun because Avodah La'ami means worship of my people, and Ami was from Beth Am. So, I mean, we were just having fun with titles, but we went in a very different direction after the work about Moses to a Friday evening service in a very extensive musical setting of a Friday evening service for cantor and unison chorus and congregation. And I'll play you just a few excerpts. Cantor Markowitz, it's okay if I go a few minutes past 9? Okay, I promise not to go too far. But so in this work, it's a through-composed piece in certain respects, meaning the motivic material occurs throughout. The modal changes were things that we planned based on traditional models, but with Hans's particular melodic and harmonic language. If we were to listen to the whole piece, you would hear how it kind of hangs together, but instead of sounding like traditional nusach, it's a composed work with familiar melodic fragments and so forth. I'm going to begin by playing the Lecha Dodi because it'll give you an idea of how he worked with these materials. A very singable refrain for cantor and congregation that you hear several times. The usual 4 stanzas that we tend to sing in Reformed congregations, and you'll hear the first 2 very similarly set, but then the third one, Hit Orari, when you're supposed to wake up and be illuminated by this Shabbat, takes a very different direction and gives a more cantorial interpretation of that stanza of the poem, and then the refrain comes in, and then finally, B'oi v'Shalom, enter in peace, has its own particular quality. So often we hear a work with a refrain and a verse, and then a refrain, and then the same music for the verse, and then a refrain and the same music for the verse. In this case, Hans the textures, but also ensures that the congregation and the choir are going to be able to sing all of the responses in Lecha Dodi. So this is a live recording in the sanctuary at North Shore Congregation in Israel, so it doesn't have the same immediacy as the recording of Moses, but I think I'm able to get a sense of what was happening in the room. Here's Lecha Dodi.
Amor,
So a completely accessible congregational melody interspersed with cantorial interpretive singing, and one that people in the congregation picked up very quickly in that service. I was just realizing these recordings probably haven't been heard by anybody in almost 30 years. So I'm really grateful that we have this series at Am Shalom and are able to kind of go back and capture some of these moments in Chicago's broader Jewish musical history. So just a couple more excerpts from this work to show you how Hans was working with the new environment. Because my main point of the whole evening is how he worked from a very kind of mainstream traditional approach to composition for the synagogue to an imaginative, evolving, transformational approach to composing that also allowed us to kind of harmonize the emerging importance of congregational singing with cantorial singing through the medium of unison chorus as the galvanizing body. So here how Hans treated the Chatzi Kaddish, the Reader's Kaddish, for this service. He composed his own music for the cantorial portion, but you'll hear how seamlessly he interweaves the familiar refrains that we all sing on Friday night. So here's the Reader's Kaddish.
Amen.
So I'm sure you were able to sing along either out loud or spiritually to that. And it was a really interesting way to explore familiar melody in their relationship to emerging music. So here's a short Yismechu v'malchutcha, the rejoicing song of Shabbat. And you'll hear, I think, some of the adult choir and also some children's choir. I know that Hans worked with children very much throughout his career, and maybe some of you here experienced that in person. And we'll hear about that in just a few minutes. We'll take a few questions and comments. So here is Yismechu in a very spirited setting. And with another easily sung refrain. It was fun. I wish I knew who those children were. I can go back and find the program and find out. So one last selection from Avodah B'Shira, worship through song. Just a V'tahir Libenu, the melody of which you'll recognize. And the technique that Hans was developing here was establishing the melody that people knew, and then having the cantorial interpretive part superimpose over the melody that people could continue to sing, so that the prayer was being shared by the congregation and the cantor in a way that gave each a presence in the prayer's expression. So here's a little bit of V'tahir Libenu, and you'll hear the descant, we might call it in musical terms, the overlay voice for the cantor once the main melody has been set forward. So just a sampling from the service that we worked on so closely, and a reminder that the purpose of sharing this is to give you a sense of how, especially, my career has kind of spanned a period of time in which there's been a tremendous transformation in synagogue musical life and the public prayer practices of the Reformed community. And what we were exploring was, as I've said before, this intersection of the congregational voice being able to be heard and expressed fully, while also incorporating the interpretive artistry of music written for cantorial expression, and how those might speak to each other, at least in the context of those times. And because Hans had the tremendous depth that was represented by his early education and by his growth, I guess I didn't mention any of the basic bio material. He was born in 1922 in Vienna. Family fled to America, thankfully, in advance of the war. And as you know, he was largely serving in the Chicago community from the 50s on, and he passed in 2001 in Evanston. He had two sons, one of whom, Alex, became a theater composer, for films. And you can find information online about Alex's compositions. The other son, Felix, with whom I had the privilege of working, was a wonderful cellist, passed away several years ago and left behind wonderful music making of his own, which you can still find on an active website under Felix WURMAN. There's so much more that we could say about his oeuvre. Many, many compositions for solo voice, many, many, many choral, independent choral works. In Kol Zimra, we sang one to the 150th psalm that started, Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. Then it modulated and went through every key imaginable. And I wasn't able to find the recording of that, but I have somebody who's going to discover it for us. So you Kol Zimra folks, I'll get hold of it and you can hear it again. But again, just this tremendous wedding of harmony, melody, and form that represent the works of a great composer. So I was really fortunate to do so much singing with him and to be a collaborator and a friend and to enjoy the warmth of his smile and his kindness, which was always exuding from every pore of who he was. So I think I want to play one more track before we leave, but I think we might have 5 minutes for any questions or comments, and then it's a short track to listen to as kind of a lullaby for us for tonight and a prayer for peace in our world. So, Cantor Markowitz, do we want to take a question or two or a comment?
Yes, Cantor Staple, do you want to? Anyone else? Anyone? I know there are a few people here that actually worked or sang with Hans WURMAN.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Let me see if we can.
Oh, Linda, I see your hand raised. And
Fran,
Ruth, and Fran,
Ruth, and
Howard.
Rob, and Howard.
It's amazing.
Let's see. I was actually wondering if there was anything specific from those of you who actually did sing with him, aside from Cantor Cohn, of course, that sort of really.
I had a question.
Oh,
I did have
Rob.
a question. I'm one of the fortunate people here on the Zoom who grew up at Betham and was a member of the Betham Junior Choir for many years.
Amazing.
Hans had a beautiful composition for Friday nights for lighting of the candles, and I've never heard it used anywhere else. Do you know by any chance if Transcontinental has them?
Well, in the blue,
because I would love to introduce our congregation.
In the blue, tell me if this is the piece, okay? So it starts.
Yes, that is it.
Is that the one?
Yes.
Oh, it's published. Yeah, it's absolutely in this volume. I don't know if this is still in print. Cantor Staple and I maybe conspire to get you a copy of this. How would that be, Rob?
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, and in fact, Scott Coomer sent me a recording of that piece too. So that's a great, that's a beautiful piece that is extremely easy for the congregation to embrace. Thank you, Rob.
A fun fact: Fran mentioned that that Hans was the music director of Jacques Brel when she was one of the
Indeed.
cast
Yeah,
members.
he was amazing. He was our music director, and I just mentioned to Andrea, I had to leave this for a little bit, but I'm back. Um, Stan Porter, who was an ordained cantor, was in our cast, and so it's kind of an interesting thing. But Hans was great. He even took me on a tour of his Moog synthesizer years ago. I don't know if you mentioned that or not, as I said I was gone for a little while here.
I did. I
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
Thank you for that. Thank you for those memories.
yeah, yeah. It's fun.
I have a question. The Moses piece was really amazing. Has it gone beyond the Jewish community? Is it performed elsewhere in the?
It is not, and I really hope I can find Alex WURMAN because I don't know where the string parts are. In other words, the actual, first violin, second violin, viola, cello parts, and the harp part. If we were trying to recreate it, you can almost recreate it from the vocal score, but I imagine, I don't know who saved all the materials. It was clear at a certain point that Felix seemed to have some of them, but I'm just not sure right now. But no, the piece was never, to my knowledge, performed in the general sphere, but it's a great piece of midrash.
I mean, I could see that in a black church easily.
Oh, wow.
Rob?
Thank you.
Ralph Raybach.
Yes, I wanted to mention, you mentioned about children's choirs. One of the past presidents of Beth Am, which we started in 1948, is here, David Lebowitz, and I'd like him to say something about the children's choir that his family was part of.
Oh,
I'd
wonderful.
be happy to.
There he is.
You hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
David.
Okay.
Hi,
Yes, I'm the last living past president, by the way, and this is a wonderful birthday present for my wife and myself, who both celebrate birthdays this week. My 90th.
Happy birthday.
And yes, Hans had such an amazing way of working with kids in a choir. Our junior choir actually sounded professional. They really did. There would, in those days, they would have like a contest where they would bring all the chapel choirs together, and they always stole the show. And part of what they did when Hans was conducting Jacques Brel, their theme was "If We Only Have Love" from the Jacques Brel show, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house when they got through singing it. Also, not many people know this, but your Moses program was preceded by Hans's presentation of Leonard Bernstein's Mass at Beth Am, our Friday night, consisting of adult choir, professional choir, children's choir, a jazz band, a whole mishmash, and the whole thing. And there's a lot of similarity, by the way.
Yeah, I know. You're so right, David.
Between the two. But thank you so much for providing this for us. You have to understand that this was congregational music, but its effect on the children was amazing. Our two older kids went all through their school experience with Hans, and Hans was not kind to the kids when he was working with them. He was very tough, and they loved him for the toughness. And it was just a great experience. He was an amazing man.
We have.
Thank you.
By the way, I have a CD. tapes to record them secretly. The choir, I have many tapes of the choir, and I have the mass as well.
Oh, that's incredible. And it's wonderful that you were there. And yes, this admixture of classical music, electronic music, theater music, synagogue music, was really an extraordinary career that Hans had. And he was incomparable. So really,
Yeah,
really
my
amazing.
my son Rob, who you heard from before, actually worked for Hans at Sonar Recordings one summer.
Oh, well, that's cool. That's cool. So, Cantors, I'm thinking I should play this one more track if that's okay. And I chose it to conclude, given especially the circumstances in the world right now, for the piece Avodah B'Shirah that I shared with you a little bit of earlier. Hans wrote a beautiful Shalom Rav, which he transmitted through an instrumental version as the prelude to the service. And I thought it would be the right way to end our session together tonight, or to complete this prayer for peace, not the vocal version, but this beautiful, beautiful rendition for string quartet in which the cello takes the leading voice, and without the benefit of words, or perhaps transcending the limitation of words, expresses this fervent prayer for a wholeness that will, somehow emerge, if not immediately, in the length of time as we continue from day to day, from Sabbath to Sabbath, from month to month, and year to year, to offer our prayers and to work diligently for justice, wholeness, and peace in all places where there's life. So we'll conclude then with this string quartet version of Shalom Rav. And I can't remember, but I imagine that it must have been Felix WURMAN on cello for this performance. I'm not absolutely positive. So let's mute generally, and I'll play this one recording, and then we'll have a chance to say good evening to each other. So here's Shalom Rav transmitted through string quartet. And even with that smile at the end, with the pizzicato conclusion, and all those beautiful sliding harmonics, just as in the piece with which we began, Yehu L'Ratzon. So I really want to express my gratitude to to Andrea and to Julie for the invitation and for the opportunity to spend a little of this evening with all of you, and to everyone who's joined us for the program tonight and been warmed by that sweet spirit of Hans WURMAN. Thank you all so much.
But we really need a thank you. What a special way to end this program tonight. And thank you, Cantor Cohn, for being with us and teaching us about HANS and his music and his impact on Jewish choral music in Chicago and beyond. It was really just so wonderful to learn about and hear so much of his music. It was fun, it was meaningful, it was traditional, it was contemporary. It was everything. I could go on and on. And really what a treat for so many of you that are here on the Zoom to take a walk down memory lane. And for others like me, it was a privilege to learn about HANS in depth for the first time. So thank you again so much. And just a few brief announcements for our April music events coming up at Am Shalom. Our next Music Monday Israel edition will be on April 11th at 12:30 p.m. on Zoom. And we will be joined by Daphna Rosenberg and Yoel Sykes from Jerusalem-based group Nava Tehillah. And our next Jewish Music Heritage learning series next month will take place on Thursday, April 21st, 7 p.m., same time, same place on Zoom. And Cantor Jeff Klepper will share his experience as cantor and composer in cultivating the congregational voice in the 1980s and 90s in Chicagoland and beyond. Don't forget to come by the synagogue tomorrow between 9:30 and 10:30 a.m. to pick up a challah. Quit loafing around. I think it's the last challah before Passover, so don't miss out on it. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight, and thank you again, Cantor Cohn.
Of course, thank you.
A wonderful Beth Am reunion here. Rob, hello, and Sandy and Blooms and Leibowitz.
I was a member of Southside Hebrew congregation, and we didn't have a real choir, so we merged with Beth Am, and that's when I got to sing with Hans for the first time as a small child. So this brought up a lot of wonderful memories. And dearest Richard and Marcia, so great to see you, and you've broadened my base even more about, I really didn't know how much you had worked with Hans WURMAN, and thank you from the bottom of my heart. It was wonderful.
You're
Just
welcome,
wonderful
Linda.
to be with you again.
Great to see you too.
Thank you. Such incredible music, and it's, as always, great to have you at Am Shalom, and we hope to see you more in the coming months ahead and here. So thanks, everyone, for being with us, and Shabbat Shalom, and Shushan Purim Sameach.
Shushan Purim, and happy birthday, Andrea.
Yom Huledet
And to
Sameach.
David and Anita.
David and Anita, too.
Yes.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Have a great
Shalom,
night.
everybody.
Erev Tov.